right, y'all, what is up? This is going to be part of the series I'm doing this summer where I run the program that I have laid out for the student athletes here at PLU. And with week 5 coming up in the actual summer program, week 5, I've given them off because it's the week of 4th of July. And so with that coming up, there's not going to be a lot of training content. In lieu of that, what I'm going to do is sort of each day or so post something where I go through the different days and different concepts that I've been using when programming this. And so the first thing that I wanted to touch on is this, sorry, gotta kick the shoes off, dude, is this concept of high-low. So this template right here, I stole off Instagram from Fred Duncan. I think he's at Fred_Duncan if you want to go give him a follow. Solid stuff. But it was a really, really cool way to lay it out and I think make it simple. And when it comes to organizing a training week and making decisions on what to do on specific days and how to order that, I really like to use this high-low system of thought and methodology when I'm approaching it. Now, I will say, I would not call the program that I am running a high-low program, but the categorization of the stresses, the exercises, movements, the intent of each of those things that I am doing does follow the sort of base underlying concept of what makes a high-low system work. So for those of you who are unfamiliar, a high-low system essentially refers to an organizational structure of training where you stack the highest amount of neural stress on one day, and then following day, you make that a low neural stress day, so that the next day you can be high, and then the next day low, so on and so forth throughout the course of the year. And what that allows us to do is it allows us to silo this stress. So on the surface, right, usually, the typical school of thought is like, okay, well, we're having a hard practice today, and obviously practice in the game or the event is the most important thing, right? So let's make the weight room day easy, right? Because we want to save them for that hard practice. It's like, okay, well, that means that the next day, when they have an easy practice, we're going to go hard in the weight room, right? And while on the surface of it, that sounds like the right way to organize it, what that leads to is every single day of their training week, they're going to end up doing something hard, right? So instead of approaching it in that sort of disjointed way, what the high-low system calls for is a siloing of that stress, where if you're having a hard practice on that day, the training is also going to be intense. So that the following day, when the practice is easier, we can make the training more restorative. So it allows you to squeeze the most you can out of those high stress, those things that really do lead to those output and performance adaptations that we're looking for as coaches, and then makes those low days truly low and truly gives their body the ability to recover from those things. And so categorizing stresses, movements, anything you're programming as high or low tends to be what I go to first, because then I'm able to lay it out in a way that makes sense and I can see the balance, right? If I see high too much on there, I'm like, okay, this is going to be a really hard program. If I see too much low spread throughout the week, I'm like, this might not be stimulative enough to actually drive any adaptations. So with all that being said, I laid out the template that was on his Instagram post, not to the T, just sort of the general stuff, but again, used his model for this. And so let's get into it. Kind of what do we categorize as a high stress and what do we categorize as a low stress? So on the high side here in blue, you can see the first thing, alactic power and capacity. Any type of conditioning or energy system development you're doing on the alactic end of things is going to be high. It is going to happen really, really fast. It's going to require a lot of motor unit recruitment, and it's all going to happen really quickly without the presence of oxygen. That is a very high stress for our body. Our body likes to have oxygen available to use as energy. It can do it longer. It can sustain activity longer when that's your main form of it. And so that puts a really, really high stress on your system as a whole. The second part is really any sprinting you'll do. You'll see here I got resisted, I got acceleration work, I got max velo. Really any time you're going out to sprint, even if you're doing a modified thing like a resisted sprint, it is going to be a huge neural tax. That is probably the most neurally taxing thing that we can do in the performance realm. After that, you have intensive jumping, plyometric work, and medicine ball work. Intensive simply means that these movements are going to be complex, they're going to be very demanding, and they're going to be of a high intent. Olympic lifting fits under there. I think that this could also fit under low in some circumstances, depending on what approach you're using. If you're doing more complex work, right, in terms of like an Olympic complex, so combining multiple different variations together to make one rep, I think that would be considered maybe more low because it is submaximal. But when we get into our maximal type of Olympic lifting, where we're clean and heavy, we're clean and jerk and heavy, we're snatch and heavy, right? Those things, or even doing a snatch really, really fast, right? Those types of Olympic lifting variations could be considered high. And then over here, you have your primary strength work. In parentheses, you'll see max effort, because not all strength training is considered a high neural stress. However, maximum effort methods that you might find, so doing really heavy singles, anything really above 85%, I think is generally considered high. So again, not all types of resistance training or strength training fit into the high category, but definitely those maximum effort methods. And that leads us over here to the low side in purple. So starting at the top, we have aerobic power and capacity. So these are things that they are not as intense, although the duration of the activity is longer. The intensity is such that it's not going to have a high amount of neural stress. In fact, a lot of aerobic work tends to be pretty restorative and helps us recover from those higher intensity bouts. Tempo work in the weight room, so if you're doing isometrics, if you're doing eccentric tempos, if you're doing, and rather I should correct myself here, if you're doing yielding isometrics, if you're going overcoming would definitely go into the high category. But yielding isometrics, eccentric, concentric tempos, things like that fit under to the low, because the tempo acts as a constraint to the amount of load that you can use in those exercises. Therefore, it tends to be submaximal in terms of the intensity. Circuits as well, same thing. You are constrained by the goal of the circuit, which is to move continuously. Therefore, you're probably not going to be using maximal weight or load in a circuit. Extensive jumps and plyos is the exact opposite of intensive. So much like the difference between alactic and aerobic work, these are plyometrics and jumps that happen over a longer period of time, a longer duration, and you collect more impact, but the movements themselves are not as intense, right? Something like a depth jump, where you drop off of a box and try and jump as high as you can off of it. That's an example of an intensive. Something like an extensive jump or plyometric would be, hey, we are going to do variable pogos, right? For about 20 yards, right? Or 25 or 30 yards. I don't care about how high or how far you go. I just care that you're light and quick off the ground. That would be an example of extensive work. Don't get it twisted here. There's a lot of like this upper body stuff. So like upper body prehab, upper body plyos, if you're doing like, clap push-ups, or you're doing like push-up fall drop catches, what have you, right? It's not that upper body work can't be highly neurally taxing, but what we find is that after a heavy bench day, I can still go out and sprint, right? Now, if we start getting into throwing sports where you're maybe a pitcher, right, or you're playing baseball or softball, or even javelin, shot put, all that, right? If I have a really heavy bench day, I wouldn't really consider that to be a low stress, right, just because it's upper body. I would bump that over to the high stress side of things, because you have to throw and implement. And even though globally you're not as taxed as if you did heavy squats or heavy cleans, because you're using your upper body for a large portion of that to express that skill, that would definitely fall into a high category. But for most sports and stuff like that, the upper body work is not going to interfere with your ability to do things that matter, like jumping and sprinting. And then here you have primary strength work as well. That's not necessarily the max effort thing that we're looking for. These movements are submaximal in effort, higher reps, lower load, right? You could even fit the tempo into there. Again, these things aren't going to be highly neurally taxing. It's going to be more tissue focused, and you're going to be able to even find some type of restorative quality in a lot of this tempo work and a lot of the submaximal work. And then lastly, accessories. You could certainly push accessories over into the high category depending on how you're doing them. But for the most part, those accessory movements fall into the low category.